Okay, so as I said, what we're going to go over is how to find credible resources, how to properly paraphrase information, and then also how to use APA citation, and then a few academic writing tips. So the first thing I just want to say briefly, so it's really important to remember that even though there's so much information online for its face value, you want to look into it a little bit more and make sure that you have the full information and what you are reading is actually credible and true. So I'm just going to go over quickly a couple different types of sources. We're just going to touch on this really quickly, but two types of sources that you are going to find when you are looking for resources are scholarly sources and then also popular sources. So a scholarly source is something that is written by a qualified research, an expert in their field, and it's intended for a specific audience. So if you want to have your source to be a scholarly source, the process to be published involves peer reviewing, and you require an extensive list of your own references used in the publication. So that's a good way of knowing whether something is a scholarly source, if there is an extensive list of references at the end of the publication. So some examples of this are academic journals, and then also some books that are written by scholars and experts. A popular source is something that is written by and intended for a general audience, okay? So, you know, not something specific, anybody can read it. A lot of the time the language is easier to understand, and popular sources are not peer reviewed, and they do not usually include a reference list. In some cases they might, but a lot of the time they don't. And popular sources range from books, magazines, websites, blogs. So those are some examples. So both sources can be valuable depending what you are researching or what you are examining. And if you know that you're looking at a popular source and you're not sure if you know it is credible for you, you can always ask your faculty or somebody, you know, on the academic team, and they can always help you out there. So another difference between sources is we have primary sources and secondary sources. Both of them are valuable, and you want to include a combination of both in your writing. So a primary source is something that's a first-hand or an eyewitness account of information by an individual. So an autobiography, you know, they're writing about their own experiences in their life. Statistics and data, so that would be, you know, the researcher is doing research, and it is their own statistics and their own data that they are talking about in their paper. Newspaper articles written by a reporter, you know, that was there when it happened, or, you know, really close to the source. If somebody is writing a newspaper article about an interview, then that would be a secondary source, okay? So that's a source that is more removed from the event, and it's usually written after the event has happened. So biographies, you know, somebody that has interviewed tons of people about a different person. Interpretation of statistics and data. So if somebody is taking statistics and data that were found by another group of people and interpreting it in their own way, that would be a secondary source. And then also, you know, history books, something for someone that wrote about a historical event that happened years previously, that textbook or book that you're reading would be a secondary source. But it's important to understand that even though a lot of sources are secondary sources, that doesn't mean that it's not a valuable source to be using. I just want to remind everyone to turn their microphones off. Thank you. Okay, so another way that I like to, well, one way that I like to check to see if I have a credible source is to use this checklist. Can everyone please turn off their microphones? There we go. Okay. So this is a great checklist. So what you're going to do is you're going to find out about the author. You know, you want to find out if they are an expert in the content that you are reading. Or are they just a person that decided to, write an article about something that they don't know that much about? So you really want to find out about the author or the organization that wrote this information that you're reading. You want to read the introduction. So if it is a scholarly journal article, you want to make sure that your topic is mentioned in the introduction, because you want to make sure there's enough information on the topic in the source to use it as a reference. If you're using a source and one sentence is mentioned on that topic, it might not be the best resource for you to be using. So you want to make sure that there is a decent amount of information on the introduction. And then also you want to determine the intended audience. This goes back to scholarly versus popular sources. You want to determine if the intended audience is a general audience, or if it is a specific audience, on a specific scholarly topic. So that's important for you to determine whether or not it's a good source for what you need. And then obviously you want to determine whether the information is fact or opinion, because especially if you're using maybe newspaper articles, a lot of the time those are opinion pieces and you might not want to be using them as a resource for information. So you definitely want to know whether what you're writing is whether it's fact or opinion. And then identify the language being used. Is it an objective voice that's being used? Or is there a lot of emotion in the language? So you want to usually gear towards, especially in academic writing, sources that are using an objective voice. And then also cross-check your information. If you are looking at multiple sources and you're finding different information across these sources that don't match up, you might want to find different sources. So you want to find sources where the information matches up, unless you're comparing two different views. Then obviously the information would be different. So you want to cross-check and make sure that you have consistent information and consistent data that you found elsewhere. And then you want to check the timeliness of the source. Is this information out of date? Is it still relevant today? If you're writing a paper about a history event, obviously that event, the history event, is not going to change over time. But if you're writing something about data that is constantly changing, you want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information that you can have. And then for a scholarly source, you want to examine the list of references, okay? Make sure that the references, you can use those references as well as sources, so that's a good way to find more sources as well. Okay, so I know that most of you guys are using the internet for a lot of your information, and that's great. There's a lot of valuable information on the internet. But I just want to give you some ways to actually use the information on the internet, in an efficient way. So Wikipedia. In most cases, we would advise against using Wikipedia as a reliable source. A lot of the pages do have an extensive reference list within text citations, but anybody can edit a Wikipedia page regardless of their expertise or knowledge on the subject. So I know probably most of your faculty would say that please don't use Wikipedia as a source. However, Wikipedia is a good stepping stone to get general information on a subject, and also you can go to that reference list at the end and you can use those resources. You can go to those resources and then you can gather information on the topic from those resources. But it's important to note, do not use Wikipedia as your main source of information, okay? You can get general information on a subject, and then you can also use the reference list, to go to those resources, and then you can pull information from that. Also, using a search engine. Search engines are a great way to find information, but some important things is you want to be specific. You can also use an advanced search. So I've input a photo here of the Google Advanced Search. So you can do exact words or phrases. You can do any words. You can disclude words or exclude words, sorry. can exclude words, and then you can include numbers as well. And then there's also a thing called Boolean operators. So they are words that you can input into your search to get specific. So if you're looking for, you know, multiple things, you can include and, so it will search all of those things. You can also include or, so if you want to find something about magazines or newspapers, but not both, then you would include or if you want to exclude something, you can include not. Also, near is a really good word to use in your search, because sometimes you could be using home and magazine, or try and think of, so two things that you want to include together, but if the words are separate and then, you know, they're really far apart in the article, then you want to use near to make sure that those words are actually near each other in the article. So that, and it will exclude, you know, everything else where they're really far apart and actually aren't relevant together. So definitely use search engines, but make sure that you're specific. And using advanced search is a great way of finding better information. Okay, so also online databases are a great way to find information, and there are actually a lot of online databases that are free for you to access. So if you have a library card with the Toronto Public Library, you can access all of their online databases. Okay, so you can take a screenshot of this page because you know, these are really great resources for you. So Toronto Public Library, if you don't have a library card, you know, as soon as the library is open, please get one, because there's so much information available on their website. You can get ebooks. You can also access all of their articles online through tons of their databases. So it's a great way to have access to a bunch of resources from your computer. Also, EBSCOhost is another online database, and they have an open database as well. It is a little bit more limited because it's, you know, it's a free access, but you can definitely check that out. And then also Google Scholar, the great source for online articles, scholar.google.ca, or you can just go into Google and search Google Scholar. I mean, I used it when I was in university, and it has tons of free articles and journal databases that you can use for that as well. And what you do, you can just search, use them to search like a search engine. Okay, so you would go to Google Scholar and you would type in your topic or type in what you're researching, and then it will generate tons of articles about the topic that you're looking for, and you can go through it and decide, you know, which ones are relevant for you and which ones are not relevant for you. So it's a really great resource. Okay, so paraphrasing. So I know a lot of students have trouble with paraphrasing, and have a lot of students can plagiarize without even meaning to, because they're not paraphrasing properly. And you know what, like, paraphrasing is not easy. It takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of work. So you want to make sure that you are understanding the information that you're paraphrasing before you do it. Okay, so paraphrasing is an important tool in academic writing to avoid overusing direct quotes from sources. So, you know, instead of in your paper, you don't want to just constantly be putting in direct quotes, because first of all, it looks like you don't understand the information, and second of all, it doesn't look great just having quotes all over. So paraphrasing is a great tool to reword and rearrange information into your own words. It's not meant to be a summary of the text, but a more detailed restatement of a passage. So the 4 R's of paraphrasing. Okay, so the best way to paraphrase is you want to read the passage. You want to read it and you want to reread it until you understand it. Okay, and then you want to restate it. So what you're doing is you're rewriting the passage in your own words, using the important points, and also using your voice. So the language that you would use to write something, okay? And then you want to go over and recheck. Make sure that you included the important things. And if something didn't seem that important, you can leave it out. And then also you want to repair. So sometimes when you paraphrase something, you might have included some misinformation when you rewrote it. So when you go into repair, you make sure that everything in your paraphrasing paragraph or statement is correct. Okay, so the 4 R's: read, restate, recheck, and repair. I'm actually going to show you a passage that I paraphrased myself, and I used this website that I found, and it actually shows you whether or not you're using too many of the same words as the previous one, you know, and it's also I'm going to show you the webpage, and it's a really interesting resource for you. Okay, so this is the website. It's the same one that's on the page there. Basically, it's just a paraphrasing self-test. So when I go back to the presentation, you guys can screenshot it so that you guys can go there yourself when you're practicing paraphrasing for an assignment. But basically, the original, I just took this from actually just a website. And so the original quote from the paper was, "Matisse is the best painter ever at putting the viewer at the scene. He's the most realistic of all modern artists. If you admit the feel of the breeze as necessary to a landscape and the smell of oranges as essential to a still life. The Kasbah Gate depicts the well-known gateway Bab el-Asa, which pierces the southern wall of the city near the Sultan's palace, with scrubby coats of ivory, aqua, blue, and rose delicately fenced by the liveliest gray outline in art history. Matisse gets the essence of a Tangier afternoon, including the subtle presence of the baobab, the sentry who sits and surveys those who pass through the gate." This is from Peter Plagen's Bright Lights Newsweek. Okay, so, you know, it's just a passage from a paper, and I rewrote it in my own words. Okay, so as you can see, if you go down to, you know, the color-coded bit, so the beginning is the first passage and the second one is my passage. And you can see that I rewrote it, and I'm not using a lot of the same descripting words because those ones aren't rewritten. And I'm not using a lot of the same words at all. However, when you do read my passage, you still get the essence of the original passage. So I said, according to Plagens, Matisse is an expert at transporting his audience to the setting of the painting in front of them. One of his paintings, the Kasbah Gate, features the Bab el-Asa, which is a famous gateway entrance to the city of Tangier. Looking at this painting, one is able to experience the bright colors of the city as if one was there and feel the eyes of the sentry watching over the passerbys. So you're not going to get your paraphrasing right on the first try. Okay, you're going to have to edit it, and you're going to have to rewrite it, and you're going to have to look at it and be like, okay, no, this sounds too similar. Oh, I missed some important points. I added something that actually wasn't in the original phrase. So you're not going to get it right on the first try, but you just got to keep practicing. When I first started paraphrasing, I was not great at it either. You know, it takes work and it takes practice, but it's important to keep trying. Ask your faculty for help. You can also ask your friends for help. Okay, get them to read your work. So paraphrasing takes work. You're not going to get it right on the first try, but you just keep editing your work. So this is the website that I used, and it's just great to use to practice paraphrasing. So what you can do is just take passages from, you know, articles or from, you know, textbooks, and then just practice rewriting them in your own words, and that's a great way to practice paraphrasing. Okay, so now on to some important stuff. So APA citation. So we use citation in referencing in order to give credit to the person whose information or material we're using to write our papers. If we do not give credit where it's due, we can be accused of stealing and others' ideas or plagiarizing. There are a lot of different styles or ways to cite reference resources, but we focus on APA citation at Alpha, so that's what you guys are going to be using. You know, whether we use a direct quote or paraphrase information, we have to cite the reference that it came from in two ways. In text citation, and then also we need to include a reference page. So a great resource is the APA Citation Guide from St. Lawrence College. So you can download it from this website here. Please screenshot this so that you can download it. I'm also going to show you what it looks like, the guide, right now, just really quickly. I'm not going to go through it, but, you know, sorry. This is the guide right here. Okay, so it's a reference and citation guide, APA style. Please use this when you're referencing. It's really detailed. It tells you exactly how to do in-text citations for books, for authors, for websites. It also tells you how to do your reference page, what a reference page is, why you have to use it. It's really, really, really a great resource. So please, please use that when you are making all of your citations. Okay, so for formatting, every guide has their own way to format a paper. So please consult with your instructor whether or not you need a title page or whether or not you need an introduction or an abstract. But some important things to remember, you know, you should always be submitting a typed paper. You should always be double spaced. You should always have 1-inch margins, and you should always be using a standard font like Times New Roman and between 10 and 12 points. And then obviously printed on a standard size paper. I'm going to show you an example of what this would look like. I just have my Word document here. There we go. Okay, so this is my cover page. So it has the title of my my paper, has my name, the you know, the company or the college that I'm coming from. You need to include the course, and then you need to include your instructor's name and the date. Okay, the date that you are submitting it, the date that it is due. Okay, you need to include all of these things, and then you also need to include your page number. Okay, so on your first page, you're not going to include the title up here. So what you can do is you just click this button up here that says different first page. Okay. So when you want to get to the header, you go like this, you double click there and you click different first page, okay? So then your first page header looks different than your other ones. And here I have my title in all caps, and then I'm gonna have all of my numbers later, okay? So how you would do those is, I'm just gonna show you really quick. So you're gonna do your page number, your top of the page, right on the left here, okay? And then this is where you're going to put in your title. So APA Citation Guide, and then you do that. And then if you go down, if I go to the third page, it's the correct page number there, okay? So it's just really quick. You want to make sure that you're formatting everything properly. Okay, but also check with your instructor, because you might not need to include a title page, and you might not need to include an introduction or abstract page, but make sure that you know what you're supposed to include before you submit it. Okay, so for in-text citations, I'm just going to go over a little, like, quickly how we would do it. But if you want to really understand, you're going to want to read you know, that APA reference guide from St. Lawrence College. It's really detailed and it's really great. But really quickly, so for an in-text citation, you need to include 2 or 3 pieces of information, okay? So you always need to include the author, and you always need to include the date that it was published. And if it's a direct quote, or you know, it's from a book or a newspaper article or a journal that it has pages, you're going to include the page that you retrieve the quote from, okay? So you separate each thing by a bracket. So we have, So if you have one author, you're going to do who, that's my last name, and then the year that it was published, 2020. If there was a page number that you needed to include, you put another comma after 2020 and then include P, dot, and whatever the number was. So you're going to make sure you do that. If you're including it in the text, you could put who, bracket, 2020, end bracket, suggest that, dot, dot, dot. Okay, if there's two authors, you're going to make sure you always include both authors. So Hool and McCormack. If there's 3 to 5 authors, in the first citation that you use the reference, you're going to write every single name. But in subsequent citations, so in the second, third, fourth, fifth, however many times you have to include this reference, you do Hool et al. And then the date. Okay, and then if there's more than 6 authors in the reference, then you're always going to do Hool et al. If there's no clear author, you know, if it's a website that you're using or, you know, a document from an organization who has written the work and there's no clear author, then you would use the group or the organization who has written the work. For example, if you were taking something from our Career Center, it would be Alpha Career Center 2020. Okay, so that's really important for your in-text citations. It's mostly straightforward. You know, in-text citations are fairly easy. You just want to include the author and you want to include the date. Those are the most important things. And then we go to our reference page, okay? So even though you've cited all of your resources in the text, you need to include all resources cited in the reference page. So if you read something but did not use it specifically in your writing, you do not need to include it in your reference page, okay? So that's like general information, or if you didn't cite it specifically in the body of the writing, you don't include it in your reference page, okay? But if you did cite it and it's not in your reference page, then that's a problem. So you want to make sure that you always cite it in the text and then include it in the reference page. And you're going to do your reference page in alphabetical order, okay, by the author's last names. So the general format for APA citation in your reference page is you do the author's last name, comma, author's initials. And then you put the publication date in brackets. It could be the year. If you have the full date, then you're going to do 2005-May 12th. That could be the example. You're going to do the title of work in italicized, the place of publication, and then the name of the publisher. That's the general format. Obviously, for different resources, it changes a little bit. So I've shown you a couple of different examples of different types of documents or resources that you're going to have. So if you have a document from a website and you know the date that it was published, you see it here, Hinder P, that's the author. I'm just going to, okay, so Hinder P, that is the author. This right here is the date. That is the title of work. Remember, it's italicized. And then we always write retrieved from, and then the website that you retrieved it from, okay? And then if you don't have the date, you do exactly the same thing, but in the date spot, you put in brackets ND, okay, for no date. So that's really important. An article in the newspaper. So see, everything is almost the same here, but it's a little bit different. So author, date in brackets. Here, the title of the article is not italicized, but the title of the publication is, okay? So there's a few differences, and the best thing always is to refer back to your APA reference guide to make sure you're italicizing the correct thing. And then here, the place of the publication, in this, well, you just have to include the page, okay? So the page of the article. Sorry, second. Need to. Okay, so now we have a couple more. So another one could be a class handout. That's something that you might actually receive a lot in your classes. So if you want to include a class handout in your references, you want to make sure that you actually include that it is a handout, okay? So right here, see in brackets, it has that. So you still have the author, the date, the name of the document, and then for, you have the class handout. And for us, it would be, you know, Toronto, Ontario, Scarborough, Ontario, and then you would put Alpha International Academy, and then the name of the course, okay? That's the name of the course right there. So that would be for your class handout. Custom course materials. You know, a lot of you guys receive course workbooks for your class. That would be this situation, okay? So for custom course materials, especially if it's reprinted from another source, what we're gonna do is we're gonna include, for the author is gonna be the source that it was printed from, okay? So you wanna include who wrote the original course material. So not your instructor, but where the original material came from, the date that it was written, the name of the article, and then this is the this would be Toronto, Ontario, or Scarborough, Ontario, Alpha International Academy, and then you would put the reprinted from where it was taken. Okay. Another one, we have databases. Okay, so you know how I told you before, we were using, you know, Google Scholar or you know, EBSCOhost or a database from the public libraries. This is what you would be using. Okay, so make sure you're including the author or multiple authors if there's multiple authors, the date, the name of the article, and then here, you know, where we said before, the name of the journal article or the name of the journal, the database, that's going to be the italicized one. And you're going to say where you retrieved it from, okay? This is the publication number, and then this is the pages, okay? And then also books, you know, we might be using books as well. So everything is the same there, okay? So in this case, because it's just one book name and it isn't included in the journal or in a magazine, this is where the title is italicized, okay? But as I said before, you know, we want to refer back to the APA citation guide from St. Lawrence College for every specific type of reference if you're unsure, okay? But remember, the general format is, you know, the author's name, the publication date, title of work in italicized, and then if there is a place of publication, you include that as well, okay? So that would be the place of publication here would be Kingston, Ontario, but for us, it would be Scarborough, Ontario. Okay, these are the references that I've used for this presentation, okay? So, you know, I didn't actually come up with all of this information on my own. This is not my own resources. So I made sure that I, you know, gave credit where credit was due. In the bottom of each slide, if I used a source, I sourced it right here, okay? So I got some information from St. Lawrence College. I got more information from a university in the United States, their Academic Success Center. I got some information from the Purdue OWL Writing Lab. So Purdue University is a really big university in the States, and their writing lab resources is also really good. So you could look up Purdue OWL Writing Lab, and they will give you so much information about properly sourcing and properly citing and all of that. So they are a great source for that as well. So I referenced everything that I used, okay? And that's important because I want to make sure that I'm not using someone else's work and somebody else's knowledge and information without giving them credit for it, okay? So yeah. Okay, so just a couple writing tips. There's not too much that I'm gonna talk about that. Yes. So somebody asked in the chat if it's possible to get this information in PDF and videos. We actually are recording this, and we are going to make it available for all students to watch at a later time. So yes, definitely, we will let you guys know where it will be available. And then just a few things. I know we've gone over time a little bit, and some of you might have class in a few minutes, so I'm just going to kind of go through this really quickly, but just some quick writing tips. You know, it is focused on academic writing, but also just writing in general. You always want to write in an active voice, okay? So the subject is always performing the action. So the girl was washing the dog, okay? So the girl is doing the action to the dog. The girl is the subject, and she is performing the action on the dog. You don't want to be writing in a passive voice where the subject, the dog, is being washed by the girl, okay? So that in that way, the action is happening to the subject. You want to flip it around and make sure that the subject is always performing the action. It sounds better. It's just a better way to use your voice in academic writing. Also, always be concise and to the point. So this is really important. Sometimes students, or sometimes, you know, even myself, like I want to, you know, sound intelligent, and maybe I'm using a lot of extra words or words that I don't really know the meaning of in my writing, and it takes away from what the point that you were trying to get across. So be concise, be to the point, and don't use, you know, extra words, or also don't just use synonyms all the time, because sometimes a synonym is not a perfect replacement for another one, okay? So don't always use thesauruses like that. You know, it's obviously you don't want to be overusing words over and over and over again, but don't just replace synonyms for another word, because it doesn't always flow correctly in a sentence, okay? So yeah, also proofread your work and have your work peer reviewed. I know it's not always possible to have your assignments finished, you know, well in advance, but for the most part, you know, get started early so that you do have a chance to at least proofread your own work. Never submit something without reading it over in full and doing at least a second copy of it, okay? Everything can always be improved on. You might have missed really easy grammar mistakes that, you know, just even giving one quick read over would have fixed that. And always remember to leave time for your reference page, okay, for your bibliography. It takes time to put it together. It takes time to make sure that everything you've cited in your paper is included in your reference page. So make sure that you leave time for that, because it's really, really important. And also collect your resources before you begin writing, and make sure you understand the topic thoroughly before you, sorry, just one second. Before you begin writing, because you want to understand the topic, especially before you begin paraphrasing or anything like that. It's a really good thing to collect all of your resources before. And then once you understand the topic thoroughly, you can begin writing whatever you need to write.